To the journalist Nicole Lampert on this very point. Nicole, I mean, what a mess this is. The idea that we're even talking about this, that we've got to this stage, is I mean, it's crazy. As I said to David at the beginning, if somebody had kind of predicted this a few years ago, you think, well, that wouldn't happen. Certainly nobody would be messing around with edits on a panorama programme. That wouldn't happen either. All of this is stuff that once upon a time was sort of unimaginable.
It feels that way, but I guess also it's just worth remembering that it's not just about Trump, it's about so much more, and that's one of the big issues, that it's easy to concentrate on Trump and his big demands, and of course it is worth saying that the BBC has apologised to him. They haven't apologised to anybody else, but they have apologised to him. But the other issues that are going on that are part of the problem with the BBC are to do with its reporting on Gaza, for example, its reporting on gender, it having things like historians who aren't historians, telling stories that aren't quite true. So there's a whole big lot of issues, and in some ways, yes, the whole story with Trump, maybe that's unimaginable, but the other stuff, maybe it is imaginable because it has been going on for more than a couple of years.
And I mean, I've been trying to work out, and I'm sure you too, Nicole, from a journalistic perspective, where does this now put the BBC? Because these are not, you know, I keep hearing people say, well, if you look back, I don't know how long the BBC's been going, 5,000 years or something, but if you look back at all of it, then, you know, you will find that, you know, the amount of stories like this don't even register. There's so few of them. But I would kind of counter that, actually, and say that's not been the case of late. And in fact, a lot of what we've got, and nobody disputes the great work that Panorama has done in the past, and some great investigative stuff. They've exposed a lot of things. It's helped change laws and bring people to justice. You know, I get all of that. I understand that. And they've done a great investigation on their news this week about people running vape shops and doing all sorts of nefarious things. You know, when good, they can be very good. But there does seem to be a reasonable, objectively, I'm saying this, body of evidence to say that things haven't got better. They've kind of got worse. And it's sort of come to a bit of a head in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, the Prescott report, or the memo, came out as a result of, partly because they were looking at themselves after the Hugh Edwards scandal and various other scandals. There's been Strictly Come Dancing scandals. There's been, you know, several others. So they had to look at themselves, and certainly for me as a member of the Jewish community, one of the big issues occurred in 22 when some Jewish kids went to Oxford Circus. They were Orthodox Jewish kids. They went there for Hanukkah. They went and they were dancing with the Hanukkah candles in Oxford Circus, and they were attacked by some men. And that became a massive became a massive story, because there was video from the bus where these men were banging on the windows with their shoes and spitting at them, and it was covered by most of the most publications just in a normal way. The BBC decided to say that the anti-Arab slurs had been heard in the bus, but no one else had heard them. They then changed it to an anti-Arab slur. But again, no one else really heard it. It was listened to. Ofcom reported against the BBC. The BBC wouldn't stand down. And I think one of the issues that we're seeing now is that the BBC, instead of looking at itself, is gone on the attack. It's attacking its enemies. And I listened to Tim Davie's speech yesterday to BBC staff, and he talked about people weaponising these attacks. And it seems to me that this isn't an organisation that's really listening to the criticism. There is some genuine criticism there that should be taken on board, particularly about BBC Arabic. And one of the things that I'm worried about is that the person that has now taken over from Deborah Turner as head of news was in charge of BBC Arabic, which had many issues.
Yeah, you might have thought that would have precluded somebody from even the interview process. Rightly or wrongly, but you might have thought that.
Yeah. He's her deputy. He's now the acting head of news. And apparently he also kind of poo-pooed the whole Trump thing. So you do have to question this judgment, his judgment, and the judgment of the people that have put him in charge of the news operation when all eyes are on it. And he's Jonathan Munro, he's named in the Prescott memo as someone that's not taking it on board, the criticisms. So are they really listening at all? So if they're not listening, then how can we expect them to change?
And I've been trying, I've worked at the BBC. I was not there for very long, but I did a bit there enough to, and have enough mates that, some lifers over there at the Beeb and others that have drifted in and out on a freelance basis as people do in this industry. But I do wonder, in the same way that people who want to become lawyers, human rights lawyers, they gravitate to that area, and it's fine, it's a democracy, because they have an inner feeling about something and injustice and all the rest of it. So they want to become lawyers in that field because it satisfies areas that they feel very strongly about. And I wonder whether we now have more people going into journalism for similar kind of reasons. And of course, going into journalism should be because you have an objective mind and a very open mind to issues, not because you are sort of single-minded on certain areas that you want to focus on. But it's in the absence of any other explanation as to why we're seeing so much of this. That's all I can think of. And going back to the bus story that which I remember well, and it was devastating to watch this unfold and to be reported as it was reported. But I can only imagine someone in the newsroom. They don't believe that their misplaced opinions in their world are not opinions, they're facts. So they don't believe they've done anything wrong, and that's the trouble. So when somebody says, I think we should go with that line and we'll talk about the anti-Arab slur from the person on the bus, even though there's literally no evidence of it, because in their mind they passionately believe that must have happened in order to facilitate this disquiet, this moment between two sets of people.
Yeah, I think that what we're definitely seeing in newsrooms and certainly at the BBC and in other places is kind of activists coming in, and that's maybe because of what's happening on our university campuses, where again we now have activists as lecturers, and certainly those of us who are Jewish are kind of like the high end of that, but we're seeing all the kind of neo-colonialist stuff, all of this kind of Britain, empire-hating stuff. So we're seeing a lot of them coming out of university kind of fired up with activism. And there's definitely, from people that I've spoken to at the BBC, and I have kind of looked into this quite deeply, and one of those things is definitely activist journalists, and the way that they kind of control, because there's a lot of them and they're very noisy. And I'm sure you were like me when I started in journalism. I was just do what I was told, really.
Yeah.
I was so happy to get my foot into the door that I would really do what I was told. And perhaps in some ways it's good that this generation of journalists, they're happier to speak up when they're unhappy about things. But perhaps it's gone too far where grown-ups are listening to, this is certainly what we saw in the report in terms of the LGBTQ plus stuff, that they were listening to a tiny cohort of activist journalists who basically meant that they weren't allowed to have any gender critical people on the TV and that kind of thing, and so there's definitely an element of that. And then certainly from what I've been told in terms of the anti-Israel stuff, which has also formed quite a large part of the report, is that it's for an audience that doesn't normally come to the BBC. It's and they know that they like this stuff. So it's an area, they're basically saying, right, here, we'll give them this, and we'll give them another Israel did something bad today, which is why there's so much on the BBC concentrating on the Israel-Gaza conflict, much more than Ukraine and Russia, which of course impacts us Brits much more in many ways.
Of course it does. Listen, very thorough stuff, Nicole. Great to have you on again. Thank you, Nicole Lampert, journalist, and very passionate about the disintegration of the state-funded broadcaster that is the BBC. Tim Davie is fighting back against the BBC enemies. Your take on